Excellent. Have a seat, everyone.
All right.
Thanks for coming. We got a little bit of a promo today from Admiral Winnefeld, which was good. And so hopefully everybody is primed for a good conversation here. We're going to talk about innovation, how the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, can incentivize it, promote it, if it can incentivize it. We have a great panel here. You know most of the panelists here, but I'll do a very quick title introduction, and then we're going to just dive right into it because you have their full bios in the lovely book. We have Admiral John Greenert, the Chief of Naval Operations. We have former Deputy Secretary of Defense, Bill Lynn. We have Gwynne Shotwell, the President of SpaceX. And then we have from Harris Corporation, Mr. William Brown. And then at the end, last but not least, Mr. Goodman from Accenture. So I'm going to start by asking each panel member a question. And then we're going to, after that first round, we will allow the other panel members to sort of jump in and fight with each other. Maybe we can get it going like a episode of the McLaughlin Group back in the day or something like that. But I want to start with you, Admiral Greenert, a little bit about just broadly, you know, what you are doing in the Navy to foster innovation and what the obstacles from your seat that you see to innovation.
Okay. So I guess I would break it down into kind of three categories. One is usually you think innovation, you think, okay, what are you doing in science and technology? What are you out there reaching for? So I think there's probably three main areas that we're doing in that regard. I have an Office of Naval Research. I provide them the general need for what we have out there. What are our threats? What are our endeavors? What do we need to be a better Navy? And they go out and do things like we talked about today, bringing a laser gun forward, get it out to sea, move on with a rail gun, an alternative to a cruise missile, and there are a host of things. So you got to get the research people, you got to be connected to them. You can't, in my view, just not have a bunch of lab coats out there doing various things and see what falls out. There's basic research that is good, but they got to understand that. That's kind of one. Two, you got to coordinate with what the Office of the Secretary of Defense is doing, or you have not necessarily chaos, but you're out of sync. And they've got to understand what you want to do so that when you want to bring something forward and you want to go outside, you know, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, if you will, process and get it out there, they understand your support. So we have a strategic concepts office down there. Dr. Will Roper does that. Use them. That's kind of second. And then third, you got to look internationally with business. You got to talk to the industry partners. I mean, in the world I live in, we have sea power because we have an industrial base that is awesome and it brings us good things. So you got to communicate with them and get their input early when you have an endeavor, a concept, in my world, a new ship, a new airplane or something. Two, you got to get your people involved. So we have a thing I call the CNO's Rapid Innovation Cell, the CRIC. Junior officers, 5 years in the Navy, 6 years in the 3 to 5 years in the Navy, and some enlisted guys. I give them $5 million to put together projects, and they do 6 a year. I started this in 2012, and actually it's working out pretty well. We have 3D printing came to the fleet, and we are making tools and things, and it is growing out by some kid, a lieutenant in the Supply Corps, that brought it to us. Now, we know the concept has been out there, but how do you bring it on board a ship, put the equipment to work while it's rocking and rolling? And by the way, if you try that and you don't stabilize it, it's like taking that string gun, you know, and shooting it all over the place. You don't get what you think you had. That's one. Two, I had a kid, a guy, a cyber warrior, who came and developed a test for under $1 million to absolutely determine the vulnerability of our ships, that we can then, what is the cyber vulnerability of our ships? And it's an astounding thing that we're using for our standard. It goes on, but anyway, you got to get the people involved for sure. And then you got to look within. It's beyond science and technology, and it's also people, but what do you have that you can do more with more innovation, or more innovatively, if you will. So for us, we have a ship called the Mobile Landing Platform. We sat down and said, we need more expeditionary capability, but we don't want to spend billions of dollars on a gray hull when really I need just the means to move things from ship to shore. So we got with a shipbuilder and we took an Alaska tanker, took the tank process out and put a ballast system in there, and we have called the Mobile Landing Platform. It costs $500 million instead of $4.5 billion. We have a joint high-speed vessel that we're putting modular processes in. Take the littoral combat ship, which is a really kind of an established modular design, and find new payloads to go in there. I already talked to you about putting a laser gun on board. So it's looking at what you have and seeing what you can do with that. What can we do better? What can OSD do better for us? I think it's communications and be willing to take more risk and allow us to, what I call in the Navy, go get things wet sooner and see how they go, retire the risk as much as feasible, or say, this isn't ready yet, and put it aside so we don't spend millions and maybe billions on a program that's just never going to come to fruition.
So let me pivot off that and go to Secretary Lynn. You've written about the Department of Defense's embrace of technology, about its relationships with technology companies. What are the roadblocks here as you see them for incentivizing innovation? What is the Department of Defense doing, what the CNO just mentioned, taking risks enough? What can we do more? What can the Defense Department do more?
Well, I mean, I think one of the challenges we face is that more and more of the innovation, more and more of the technology that we're looking for in our military is coming, the source of it is outside the Defense Department or outside the defense industry. So whereas, in the Cold War, the defense complex was really a net exporter of technology. You got GPS, the origins of the internet itself even came from some DoD research projects, and so things were being developed inside the enterprise and then being pushed out. More and more, we find the model is reversed. When you look at kind of future technologies, nanotechnology, 3D printing, the cloud, the source of that innovation is commercial. And so what you need to do is you need to bring those technologies inside the enterprise, operationalize them for military, for operational purposes. That means we need to broaden the base of companies and that we get that technology from, so we need to make it easier to do business with the Department of Defense. I would not say it's gotten harder over the past few years. It's probably about the same, if anything, even a little bit better, but the importance has grown. The importance of pulling commercial companies in has grown, so the barriers that exist have become more daunting because of the importance to DoD of getting over those barriers.
I'm going to skip down to Mr. Goodman here, going out of order. You've talked about the requirements process, the way that the Department of Defense lays down requirements for new acquisitions as being a disincentive to innovation. I want you to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about how you think the Department of Defense can best pursue innovation.
Very good. So Accenture is primarily a commercial company, and we've built our business within the Department of Defense, bringing the solutions that have worked for our commercial clients and adapting them to meet the particular needs of the defense market. And the way in which we engage with our commercial clients obviously is fundamentally different than the requirements process and the RFP process within the Department of Defense. But I'd say what also is very different, and I think it's the key obstacle for the department in terms of driving more innovation into its acquisition process, is what they ask for, how they ask for it, and then how they train their people to buy it. So maybe I could just give a commercial example. and then draw the analogy to the Department of Defense, because I was trying to think of examples where the department is doing a lot of these things, and I think this will kind of crystallize it. So one of our commercial clients is Disney, and a few years ago, Disney was trying to figure out how they could grow their parks business, and they were trying to figure out how they could do it differently, because their traditional way of growing their parks business was by spending a lot of money to add on to the park, build more rides, et cetera. And they realized that this was the first generation of clients or of customers they had who grew up in a connected world. So what they decided is, rather than try to change the structure of the park, in other words, change the platform, if you will, in a defense context, they wanted to create a really connected experience. And out of that realization is what came the innovation, because they changed their requirement from building a park to establishing an objective, which was to create an integrated, connected experience. And their solution was to develop My Magic Plus and the Magic Band. So you could go online, completely plan your itinerary. You'd be sent a Magic Band that had a unique identifier in it, an RFID chip that would connect into your cell phone, so that from the time you arrived in the park, you didn't have to check in your hotel. You swipe your band, it would send you automatically to your room. It would let you into the park. You can walk to any Disney restaurant at this point, and as you're approaching, it knows what meals you ordered. The meal will be waiting for you when you get there. Cinderella can greet your daughter by name, and if somewhere along the line you don't have a good experience, Cinderella can note that down in her iPad, and they can send you something on your cell phone trying to make that experience better. The key thing here is that innovation for Disney wasn't inventing a new technology. It was innovating by taking existing technologies, which were mobile technology, RFID, which had been around for a decade, along with a lot of systems integration in the back, and creating this new customer experience, which, by the way, also enabled a lot of throughput, enabled them to drive additional revenue in the park. So what are the key lessons for the Department of Defense? And what are the things, your question, they need to do differently? The first is to think about the key requirement, so you think about the requirement as an objective rather than as a statement of work. So rather than defining the requirements down to the T of exactly what's required, defining what is the business problem or what is the mission problem, and specifically asking for unique solutions and allowing for variation in terms of how to get that. And then second, I would say, it is in thinking about the solution as a change in the concept of operations, as opposed to necessarily a change in the technology. The third part of that, which we can get into later, is what needs to change within the acquisition workforce, and Frank Kendall talked about that this morning, so that you have people who are trained and know how to buy this. When we've surveyed, surveys the acquisition workforce say the three things that they really are missing is understanding of business, understanding of negotiating skills, and understanding of risk management. All three key things that I think from my perspective are fundamental that the buyer needs to understand if they're going to get innovation from their suppliers.
We could take that little band and stick it on the Carl Vinson, and first you go to the Middle East, and then you got to go to the Black Sea, and then we'll sing you all the way over to the South China Sea.
Well, so there are some problems in translation of some concepts. Okay,
Don't forget.
No. But it is a good example. Mr. Brown, I wanted to ask you about Harris Corporation. Like all defense contractors being pushed to do more in research and development. With your radios, there have been some examples that where you guys have come up with some innovative ideas that the Pentagon has really seized upon. There's also been some long programs in the world of radios that are now well known in defense writing circles as the way not to buy or produce new technology. I want to hear from you a little bit about your real world examples of where it's worked and where it hasn't worked in terms of the Pentagon incentivizing the kind of innovation we're talking about today.
First of all, Harris is a bit more than just a radio company. We have a lot of technologies that span both U.S. government, non-U.S. government, commercial applications. We happen to be known for our tactical radio business. We have a market-leading position in the U.S. and around the world in tactical radios. I sat in the Wall Street panel a few hours ago, and maybe some of the other folks did as well, and one of the themes that was in the panel was about investment chasing returns. And in reality, any CEO would have an obligation to look at what's the portfolio of things you ought to invest in to maximize the return for their owners. And that's something that we face all the time. We make hard decisions about this. So that requires three things. One is a clear process. And John spoke about that quite a bit. Talk about requirements, clear, unambiguous requirements, level playing field, and that the demand is there as well, so that there's a purchase on the back end of it. If you don't have any one of those three, the process really falls apart, and you can't justify the investment. So as a tactical radio supplier, we've seen how those pieces work and perhaps maybe not work. As the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were going full head of steam, there were urgent needs, urgent requirements. And Harris was able to leverage some commercial technologies and bring solutions to the DoD very, very quickly, within a year or two, fielding a new band, a wideband radio, our Falcon 3 radio, which grew over the course of a couple of years to close to 200,000 radios fielded in the DoD. And the key thing about that, the process was very, very clear. The requirements were very clear because it was an urgent requirement, and the demand was there. There was purchases that happened at the back end of it. And that worked very, very well. In the reality in that business, 90% of what we put into our tactical radios, 90% comes from the commercial industry, comes from the commercial supply base. It's a different encryption chip, it's a different GPS chip, but different shell with this special olive drab color on it, but most of it is coming from the commercial sector. And what we do is we package it in a way that sells it back to the DoD in a way that drives it and makes it successful. The technology in that area is moving very, very quickly. So if you contrast it with a multi-service procurement system for a radio system where the spec was written back in 2003, 2004, and really hasn't today even been fielded a decade later, you can just imagine what's happened to the supply base over that period of time. Are those components that were originally contemplated for that radio 10 years ago, 8 years ago, are they even still viable today? Are they even ready today? Are you using the latest in digital electronics and technologies, material science, to take weight out of a product? It's almost impossible for that to happen. Go back to 2007. The first iPhone was out, 2007. 6 versions since then, 600 million units. And this separate program is still going forward, limited quantities, not really well fielded. And in fact, the technology has overtaken the specification that was written a decade ago. So the process has to be clear, the requirements have to be clear, the demand has to be clear, but we also have to adapt the acquisition process to the technology. If it is revolutionary, groundbreaking, state-of-the-art technology, it's a whole different process than one you might embark on if it's a technology that exists and you're just refining it over time in an agile, spiral type of fashion. And that's what we do, and that's what we do very, very well in our commercial model in tactical radios.
Thanks. Michelle, well, SpaceX is a company that has a brand that is very known for innovation. You have been muscling your way into the Air Force satellite business in a high-profile way. From your experience, do you think that the Department of Defense is serious about promoting innovation?
Well, I think the department. Well, actually, let me start with a slightly different.
Pivot away.
I'm going to talk about why we have to innovate. Right? Innovation, embracing innovation, is not really a choice. The Chinese are innovating. They field systems faster and less expensively than we do. And if you roll that through Moore's law, they will be ahead of us. If they're not already in many areas. So I think innovation is absolutely key. Innovation by definition, it means someone's trying to improve a product or make it less expensive, make it more reliable. So innovating is improving quality of service and making things less expensive. And the other thing that I want to talk about from an innovation perspective is young, smart engineers want to work for innovative companies. They don't want to work on a project that's going to take them 20 years to field. They want to see the fruits and the results of their labor. Some panelists earlier today talked about the fact that they're losing 30% of their workforce in the next few years. The average age of my engineer is 27 years old. I don't expect to lose them for 30 years. So, so innovation is key. It's not a question. It's absolutely required. Now back to the original part of your question. I do believe that the Air Force is firmly set on a path to allow new entrants into their launch business. You hear Frank Kendall sitting up on the stage this morning. He's clearly invested in that. We're working incredibly closely with General Greaves at SMC. He's got a team of 100 or so folks helping to certify the Falcon 9 launch vehicle to make sure we're prepared for national security missions. So I think the problem or the issue is somewhere between those two areas, somewhere between Sam Greaves and Secretary Kendall. But I do believe the Air Force is invested in this. It's a very tough business. There's tons of hurdles to get through in order to do it. But you know, we're plugging along, and General Greaves' team is plugging along with us.
Secretary Lynn, I wanted you to start with this. How much can the Department of Defense do to change the way they do business on their own to foster innovation? And how much do you need action from Congress to change acquisition or other procurement reforms? What's the role of Congress versus the role of the Department of Defense in this trying to be more innovative here?
Well, I mean, there's obviously, it's not an either-or question. It's both. The department has quite a bit of freedom to implement within even the existing laws, and I think, and Frank talked about it a bit when he was here, and I think he talked even more about it when he met with some industry leaders a couple of Saturdays ago. Part of it is getting a very large organization to itself innovate, to use the flexibility it actually has, to take direction from the top and push it all the way through and change business practices, change the way the process works. It's not necessarily encumbered by legislation, it's encumbered by past practice. People have a playbook, they're used to running the same playbook, they're comfortable with it. But things need to change, and it takes a lot to get people out of their comfort zone, to learn new things, to simplify the process in ways that are going to make it somewhat less familiar to them, at least initially. So the department, I think, has that flexibility. If you want to fundamentally change the system, you do have to go to Congress, and I think Mac Thornberry and some of the others have embarked on a process to try and do that. I think the key there, and I think actually Congressman Thornberry said it in his panel, the first premise here is do no harm. I mean, if you go down a path where Congress adds layers, adds requirements, adds processes, it is almost surely going to get worse. We have too many layers, we have too many requirements, we have too many processes. The key is to thin that out without losing the fundamental purposes. Obviously, you want to protect taxpayer money, you want to get the best product at the best price. That's what all those processes are intended to do, but since we tend not to eliminate old processes when we add new ones, that it gets encrusted. Right. And I think if Congress embarks on an effort that was indicated here where they're trying to delayer that, trying to move processes that either haven't worked or have passed their time out, I think Congress can make a substantial contribution here as well.
But I would say I think the Better Buying Power 3.0 is in the right direction. And I think acquisition reform is essential. And I know Congressman Thornberry and others are working on this and driving it. We'll see a lot more. But it's hard to legislate culture change. Because I think what's happening is you've got a very big layer of people who've been around in the department for a very long time, and as you said, have been accustomed to doing business in a certain way. Legislation, I think, can put a framework around the types of changes we need to see, but at the end of the day, it's about culture change. And in governments that turn over every couple of years, or senior department leaders that turn over every couple of years, it's very hard to embed change, which sometimes takes multiple years. And I think that's one of that's the biggest challenge, in my view, facing the department and the initiatives to reform how acquisition is done today.
we heard a little bit earlier about timelines and how long it takes to build, to adopt technology, develop technology, build weapon systems. Admiral Greenert, is there a way in the future to shrink those timelines, or is that just something that we have, particularly with large weapon systems, that's something the industry is going to have to just deal with? What's your thought on that?
Well, I think as I was listening, I don't think anybody's saying anything wrong, but when I listen about building, requirements, as an example, well, that's what I do. I'm supposed to lay out the requirement. It says, here's what you need to do to articulate your requirements. Well, by the time you get through all that, it takes a lot of time, it gets a lot of review. I think it's fairly detailed, and you're starting to create a mosaic of what this thing's going to look like, and you haven't even consulted with industry yet, and not just the defense industry, to your point, Bill, to labs. So I think we need to get like engineering design modules, concepts out and demonstrate them sooner. And we have to have a means to do that. We have a means if it's urgent. We have a means if you declare it to be urgent, and all that. And then we've got to bring it from, as was stated, young engineers, and in my case, maybe junior officers or whatever, that say, we can do this better with what I have, to get that out and then turn that into a three-dimensional prototype of some sort and show it. We have done this periodically. I gave you a few small samples, but I think if we have a clear path to do that, Kendall's laying that out. Actually, when Bill Lynn was Deputy Secretary, he did it. Ash Carter did it. Codify, I don't want to say institutionalize it, that sounds like layers. Codify it so that we can get those and then have a kind of a understanding with Congress. Allow us to fund this thing, all right? I don't have fill in the following documents yet on this, but we've got to see if this will work. And then allow us to bring the good ideas. If we work to define the requirement in too much detail, I think we start shutting doors. In the world I live in, I got a shipbuilder trying to put together an engine to go to a certain speed. It's going to cost me so much money, and I don't have a clue what I'm actually saying to this person, as opposed to saying it ought to go fast. And they say, well, how fast? Here's the knee in the curve for dollars and speed, et cetera, et cetera.
Mr. Goodman, what do you think about that?
One of the problems the department has had historically is that the requirements process and the acquisition process were very separate stovepipes and were often very sequential processes, adding a lot of time, along with the reviews that Admiral Greenert mentioned. I think the Navy has been particularly good in integrating requirements process with acquisition people, with industry, so that by the time the requirements are produced, it's something that can in fact be built. And it's something that can be built on a timeline that helps meet the mission need, as opposed to having to figure that out after the process, and that it's a set of requirements that may exceed current capabilities, but I've never known industry to walk away from an opportunity. So people will respond even though there may be a high degree of technical risk, and then that slows the program down later on. What Admiral Greenert and the Navy acquisition team have done is really to integrate that much earlier in the process, and I think that's going to pay dividends, and really need to find a way of extending that across the entire department.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit about a program called the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services Program. It was a very innovative program out of NASA. It's fundamentally what spurred the development of the Falcon 9 launch vehicle and the Dragon capsule. So it was an innovative procurement process. There were requirements, but they were very performance-based requirements. And the only place where requirements were not traded were in safety to the International Space Station. So we received a contract with, or an agreement with NASA in late 2006. Dragon flew about 4 years later successfully, and then we got to the International Space Station just a year and a half after that. So we've got a great case study, a great example of how an industry-government partnership can deal with very firm requirements. You cannot hurt the space station. You can't harm the astronauts that are on board. You have to get this much capability up there. But all the stuff in between was traded, and it made for an enormously successful program, both for NASA as well as for the taxpayer.
Mr. Lynn, you've written a little bit about the need for the Department of Defense to work with technology companies that are not traditional defense companies, and to sort of widen to reach out to a broader industrial base in some ways, and bring in that sort of know-how to the Department of Defense. What are the challenges, do you think, for DoD to work with more to bring in the talent of a Google or a company like that?
Well, I mean, the structural challenges are two. One, we're relative to what else they're doing, we're not that big a market. And two, we're not a very good customer. We're not easy to deal with. So if you combine the two, it makes it very tough to get a Google or a Microsoft or companies that have other larger, more lucrative markets. That's where, as Bill said, you're chasing returns. They've got better returns, better opportunities in other places. We're not going to increase the size of our market, but we can make ourselves easier to deal with. We can reduce the barriers. We can reduce the constraints on intellectual property. You can't eliminate them, but we can get more balanced. We can, you shouldn't need to hire a fleet of cost accountants and lawyers to be able to do business with the Department of Defense. We can reduce that burden. I think if we do that, I think the advantages of the department will start to come through. And part of it is the department is still working with cutting edge technology. It is at the forefront of innovation. And I think technology companies will want to do business with the department if they find it easier to do so.
Ms. Shotwell, what are your thoughts on that in terms of how DoD can be easier to work with?
So first of all, we don't want to compete with DoD to start with. I think open markets are critically important. There are reducing the barriers to entry, important as well. We found that, although we've been able to achieve and get through every hurdle that we've encountered so far in doing business with the government. When we first started out, we heard that range safety was this impossibly difficult organization to work through and work with, and yet we had a Falcon 1 launch site at Vandenberg. We put a Falcon 9 launch site at the 45th. We had a launch site out at the Kwajalein Atoll. So it's a matter of making sure that the hurdles are not unreasonable. I think it is important to have checkpoints along the way of any path that the government has to purchase a new system. You want to make sure that the organization can do what they need to do. But yeah, for sure, the first and foremost for me is absolutely, I do not want to compete with my government.
If I can add on top of that, because I think it's beyond just the requirements. It's also, the smaller companies, they tend to be more in the high-tech space, and I think the more that the department drives open architectures and common interfaces so that components over time can be innovated rapidly, even in the context of a big multi-decade platform, so you can innovate the components very quickly, that are plug and play. I think that's going to be a big driver for where the smaller players can play into work with the DoD.
I mean, designing platforms, the platforms that DoD builds are things that last for decades. But if you look at bombers or naval vessels, they evolve over time, and they are quite different weapon systems at the end of their life than they were at their beginning in terms of how they use their capabilities expand. It almost seems that sometimes that's just happenstance. Is there more that the Pentagon can do so it's easier to design a platform that one can innovate upon, and so it is designed to be adaptable over its lifespan? Admiral Greener.
Oh, I think it's critical. It's survival. Admiral Runefeld mentioned down there, he used the term payloads and platforms, and to me, it's all about payloads, much less about platforms. So when I turn to the shipping industry and talk about the next ship, I got to think modularity. I can't have that thing wired at open architecture, as was mentioned, and I have to be ready to compromise in that regard. So I got to have power, cooling, volume. You can't run away from guns and missiles, so speed has to be less. Persistence is important. and then turn to industry and say, okay, I need to build the following effects, if you will. I need sensors that do this, and turn to them and allow them to bring them in. But just give them the specs, and then we'll be, if you will, populating that ship with it. So again, at lunch, they mentioned that Winnefeld, he commanded the Enterprise. She came in 1962. Cuban Missile Crisis was her first mission, vacuum tubes and all that stuff, right? And a whole gaggle of aircraft. 2012 was her last mission. So she had Super Hornets, you know, she had microchips, blah, blah, blah. And she was out doing Operation Enduring Freedom. So that's a carrier, but we have to do that with all our ships. We have to do it with destroyers. We cannot build these integrated things that when you want to upgrade, you have to put them in a dry dock for 18 months and rip out all the cabling and everything. You have to be able to plug in and figure out how to do that. It's modularity. To me, it's survival in the future of the industry.
Mr. Goodman, you've talked a little bit about the interaction between innovation and invention. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how one drives the other.
So, I mean, invention in my thinking is, as I said, is developing new technology. Innovation is taking existing technologies and putting them together into new concepts of operations to meet new needs. So, you know, I mean, logically, we need a structure in industry that is embedding it in our labs, in our universities, and then both within the department and within industry, I think we need organizations. We have Accenture Labs. I'm sure other organizations have, you know, different groups. You know, ONR, DARPA, that themselves are sensors, and that are looking at making the marriage between, you know, technology and customer need or client need. One of the key things in our business that we do is, you know, everybody has different stages for, you know, in a different stage process for innovation. We have a 3-stage process. Some people have 5-stage process. Doesn't really matter. But for us to get beyond sort of the second, you know, to get into the second stage, we need to have a committed client who is willing to be there, engage with us, to turn something from an idea not just into a pilot, but into not just into a demonstration, but into an actual implementable pilot that can then scale rapidly. So I mean, to me, it ties back to the same element really between requirements and acquisition, because for acquisition to be effective, it then needs to have the user there ready to work with it to make it effective. The more innovative the technology, the more quickly you need to have, the more earlier you need to have the user engaged so that you can get something that is practical and then build upon that and scale rapidly.
Is it the case that the United States cannot rely on a technological edge to last as long now as it has in the past? Or is the next offset strategy, if it relies on a technological edge, going to be by its nature shorter because China, other competing nations will match that technological edge more quickly than they have in the past? Admiral Green?
Well, I don't think it's technology only. I think it's the way we use even what we own differently. We're pretty clever, and I think we still have that. As was mentioned, I think Michelle mentioned earlier, the Chinese are very innovative and are doing that. Well, they steal a lot of what the innovation they get from us, from clear defense contractors. I do lose sleep at night about that, about in the world, you know, in particular the undersea domain, we have a technological advantage that is extraordinary, but which we will get chipped away at by just stealing it. It's a fact of life, and it adds to the point you made. It may be shorter, but my point would be it's not just technology. It's the way, it's understanding potential adversaries or anybody out there. What do they believe? How do they do things? And can we cause concern, if you will, or what am I thinking of? kind of cause them to do things differently, just because of the way they're wired, the way they think things through. It's that, and it may be enhanced technologically, if that makes sense to you, but it's more than that. I think that all of what was set up there has to enter into that.
Mr. Brown, you've talked a little bit about challenges of intellectual property ownership and how that factors into the incentivizing innovation. Where do you see that issue right now? What needs to be done?
You know, I think from our perspective, it's certainly top of mind for the folks in the department. They understand that as they encourage companies to invest in their own R&D, that creates intellectual property, that creates some value, something that companies will want to transfer not just with the U.S. government, but also to opportunities overseas. And we have to be extremely careful about that. But certainly the department has this as top of mind. I think we've got to just be very, very careful. And as people like us, like Harris, develop technology, that it's well protected. You know, it's something that we've invested in. It's sold in components to the U.S. government. We want to sell it. We want to be able to market that outside the U.S. I think the key thing that needs to happen is because the technology cycle, to me, seems to be getting shorter and shorter, it just drives a greater requirement for companies that supply to the DoD to be faster, more nimble, more agile, more flexible, bringing technology to bear very quickly. Our competitors around the world are very, very good at this. They're getting better. And I think it's incumbent on us to drive technology change a lot faster than we've had in the past, in my view.
How do you balance that need to be able to market things globally and not just the United States military with the need not to have everything stolen and have your technological edge erode faster? What's the right balance, Secretary Lynn, on globalization, do you think, in terms of for the Department of Defense?
Well, I mean, I think the terms in which things are being stolen has changed in the cyber world. It used to be you worried about somebody taking your product and reverse engineering it, and that goes back decades, even centuries. That was the common intellectual property theft. That's how you did it. That, even though it set up a world in which you were trying to stay ahead, you started with an advantage because since you invented it and it would take several years to reverse engineer it and to catch up, you were, as long as you were continuing to innovate, you would always be ahead of those who were trying to steal from you. So there was an inherent advantage. I think the terms have changed in a cyber world that the ability of countries, in this case, to take technology, the scale by which the theft can is not just a paper design. They can steal all of it with just a few keystrokes and put it into their own system just as fast, and so that lag that used to exist isn't there anymore. And so I think that the threat, and it's the dominant threat here is China. Is significant, that intellectual property theft. I don't think it's sales abroad, that it's not being able to protect your designs. And obviously we've seen numerous instances where we've had that kind of theft. We need to be able to better protect our designs, our intellectual property, our own innovation, if we're not going to have this pattern continue.
And so, do you think that should the Department of Defense become, is it still too restrictive on technology that people develop for sale to the DoD? Is it still too restrictive on what companies do with that? Ms. Shotwell, what do you think? Do you have a thought?
The launch vehicle industry might be unique, but I don't sell rockets overseas. I sell launch services overseas. And so when we have an international customer, all they get to know about is where their satellite attaches to my rocket and how we're going to get them and placed into their orbit. We do not teach them about the rocket. We don't tell them how it works. They'd love to know. They often ask. We never tell them. So I think the launch vehicle industry is a little unique in that way. Although, maybe folks used to sell rockets in their contract structure as opposed to just launch services. I think actually that's a little bit of an innovation, buying launch services instead of buying rockets.
Yeah.
I think we're sort of on the other side, at least in the radio business, because we do sell quite a lot of radio products around the world, and that's a bigger part of our business today, frankly, than selling into the DoD. And I think it works to the advantage of the United States because you've got coalition partners. And in order to be effective in the battlefield, you have to be able to communicate with one another. Mm-hmm. So having a common set of products, common set of waveforms, ways of communicating one another, to me is essential and actually builds what the strength of some of the coalitions we're trying to build around the world. I think it's actually essential.
Admiral Greener, what do you think the next steps are for DoD to sort of foster innovation? What do you think let me put it this way, the CNO after you, what is the challenge for that admiral to build upon what's going on right now?
Clarity of purpose. We kind of mentioned it here for what is needed out there. Closer interface and clearer interface with industry, all industry. I think Bill Lynn said it pretty well there. And I think Frank Kendall has us on the right track. I think he refers to it as acquisition improvement. Instead of trying to reform the whole thing, let's improve what we have. And then lastly, I think, as I've said maybe too often, the willingness to prototype and put, in the world I live in, to sea or in the air, an engineering design model sooner and look to retire that risk, that technological risk, before running something through a long process and then with the world we're living in, as said before, Moore's Law and all that, and by the time we get it out, it's either technologically too difficult, we've wasted a lot of money, or you could have had this sooner had you just brought it out and let industry look at it and help you.
Do we have the microphone for some questions here? I don't know if we're ready for that.
There's a microphone over there.
Right. Okay, great. So does anyone have any questions from the audience yet here? And all right, and the microphone is over there. Yeah, there we go, back there. I see. Okay, so it's back there. I can finally see. Go ahead.
In deference to our sponsors, Northrop and Lockheed and Raytheon, I look back in the early 90s when we won the Cold War. DoD, I think, encouraged very much consolidation of the defense business. And I'm wondering, I guess my question at the bottom line, I'd like to add some comment before you answer it, but my question at the bottom line is, isn't DoD also in a position to open up the industry a bit and develop some innovation in that method? If you look back on that consolidation, there were companies like Litton Industries, TRW, Marquardt, Hughes Aviation, and the list goes on.
Excellent. Okay, hold that. You've got the question out here, so that's a good one.
Well, hang on just
Okay, 2 more seconds.
Okay. If you go across that mountain, you'll find the San Fernando Valley. It is the Detroit of the defense electronics business at this point in time. It once was thriving, and now it's not. But the DoD, I'm wondering, can't it turn the corner and come back a bit? I know it had to consolidate at the end of the Cold War.
Okay, who wants to take a crack at that?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, I'd try and put it in historical perspective a bit. We've had 2 major changes in the structure of our industrial complex over the past couple of centuries. We started with an industry that was largely an arsenal and shipyard system from the Revolutionary War up till World War II, and that was the first change point. The demands in terms of scale and technology, World War II demanded something much more, and we built very quickly, actually, a defense industry based on large conglomerates, starting with the auto industry, but then expanding out. That system then lasted till the point you were talking about, the end of the Cold War, where the drop in spending, the change in the security requirements caused DoD to ask for and get a dramatic consolidation. Not only did we get a consolidation of defense, we also got a change in the nature of the industry. It went from conglomerates to defense specialists. Most of the conglomerates sold off their defense businesses, and a few, and most of them are listed there, a few large companies ended up being the top tier of the defense market. I think, to your point, I think we're now at a third inflection point, that forces are out there that are starting to push us towards a new industrial structure. I think those forces are, one, the budget cuts, but those alone wouldn't be enough to, we've had budget cuts before and it doesn't change the structure of the industry, but it starts a process. The other things that are going on, more, as I said earlier, we've become now a net importer of technology. It's commercial technology, so that the defense market has to broaden that way, and it is, but it has to adapt more. And then second, we've become a much more global industry, both in terms of our supply chain as well as the source of technology. I think you're going to see over the next few years the shape of the industry start to shift to reflect those changes. And I think the challenge for DoD and the industry itself is to manage that third inflection point, manage that third change, frankly, as well as the first two were managed. I think we came out with the strength of industry we have. The goal should be to maintain that as these trends gather steam.
Mr. Goodman, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do, but I'd add to it that at current course and speed, which I mean with the existing regulatory regime, that future is going to look like the existing large defense providers being integrators of commercial technology for the department. So they'll maintain their dominant position within the market, and they'll be the ones who'll be tasked, because frankly it would just be too hard for the department to get out and reach out to incorporate the technology. Recognizing the strengths that those companies bring, I still think that would be a loss for the department, because it needs to be able to have access to those companies directly. And that goes back to your earlier question, which will involve more fundamental changes, primarily around cost accounting, because that, I think, proves to be the biggest barrier for companies that have developed economic models to serve the commercial market, do not have the whole structure in place to manage costs the way the government currently expects it. It's a wonderful barrier to entry for all of us who currently serve the department, but it's probably not in the department's long-term interests.
Ms. Shotwell.
SpaceX has been able to work with the government on completely firm fixed price contracts. We developed the Dragon capsule on firm fixed price contracts, or an agreement with NASA. Falcon 9 was fundamentally our development, but we've certainly been able to sell it in a firm fixed price basis as well. So I think that is a huge barrier to entry, and I think that's worth discussing. I do want to talk a little bit about the question that the gentleman brought out. If you're only buying a few very large systems, and I'm going to use satellites. I don't know how to innovate in the Navy. I know you need an aircraft carrier. I don't know how to innovate on that, so I'm going to leave your industry alone. But I'm going to talk about the satellite industry. If you're only buying a few huge systems, there's only a few huge companies that can provide that. If you look at disaggregating the capability and bringing new entrants on in the satellite arena, little satellites that can do a mission, maybe not the same way that those giant, I'll call them Battlestar Galacticas can, those exquisite systems, but they can certainly get a good chunk of that mission done at dramatically reduced cost. So I think if the government really starts thinking about purchasing more numbers, less capability per unit, then you'll start seeing small industry proliferate again. And you'll start seeing new entrants, and I think the government will start being able to leverage the innovation that clearly is out there.
Admiral Greenert, what's the possibility of disaggregating capabilities more in the military?
Well, it kind of, to me, that means more payloads. That means less what I call building a ship or an aircraft that is so integrated that the prime does it all, as opposed to give me the basics and then I look out to the smaller and distributed, and then that should entice more. And we have little clips of that in the unmanned industry. We go out to replace our mine countermeasure systems to have more unmanned underwater vehicles to do acoustics and that. And we reach out and we find smaller companies can provide these unmanned underwater vehicles. They're amazing, and they start a competition, and now you start rolling. And the other thing that brings to you is smaller countries. We can say, you can do countermine. They say, well, no, I can't do that. I need a ship. I need a helicopter to tow big sleds. Say, no, you don't. What you need is about a 40-foot boat with this little unmanned little thing that made by company X, Y, and Z. Now we're on a roll here. So you're exactly right, and it does apply. In our big aircraft carriers, there's a lot of little companies make little nuclear components and a whole host of things. And if we aren't very careful at nurturing them and paying attention to them, and they're gone, I can't even build an aircraft carrier. I mean, if I'm not careful.
Mr. Brown, did you want to say?
Well, yeah, the only thing I would add is I think we're starting to see a trend in that direction. I think the Admiral spoke earlier about payloads. You know, and historically, you had these very large, multi-billion-dollar, decade-long development, exquisite type satellite systems, typically single mission. And where it's moving to is hosted payloads. So a government payload or a military payload riding on a commercial vehicle. And what that does is it brings down the cost. It certainly reduces time to mission, and it could improve resiliency or resiliency in space. So you've got a lot of different assets you're hosting payloads on, and it's something it's a trend. There's a contract that's out there. There's a number of companies developing technologies to put payloads for the military onto commercial satellites. I think this is clearly in the right direction to what Admiral was speaking about before in terms of payloads.
The next question.
Hi, Ms. Shotwell, you mentioned the NASA COTS program as a success story, which I fully agree with. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how the DoD could leverage that kind of model.
Well, I could talk more about the model itself. I think it was a brilliant approach. So what NASA did is said, I have this much money and I want this capability. And they opened up a competition. You could bid one of 4 different capabilities. We bid most of them, actually all of them. We bid all of them. And then NASA partnered with us once we won. It's not a contract, it's an agreement. It was like another transaction authority for the DoD. Once we did win and we started going, then NASA became our partner. I never felt like NASA was a customer, although they were paying half the bills of that development project, but they teamed with us. So they provided financial resources, they provided technical support, and they let SpaceX do the great work and the strengths that we had. They let us move with that. So kind of back to my earlier remarks, there are requirements. The DoD has to have a set of capabilities met when they're procuring systems, but limit those to performance requirements, never how-to requirements. How-to, frankly, I think SpaceX does launch better than anyone else on the planet right now, and I don't want to be told by someone who doesn't how to do that.
The next question.
Hello, my name is Ron Vadas. I work for Meggitt, a defense contractor based in the United States. As I've found that as we try and innovate, in particular working with commercial companies, and we invite them into our IR&D programs, more often than not, they will hesitate to bring in their commercial technology in order to avoid potentially getting tainted by ITAR. Any comment to that?
Anyone want to?
Sure. I mean, I start. ITAR is a big problem, particularly as you look at the globalization of the defense industry. I mean, the thing is, you market abroad, you'll find the thing that overseas companies use as one of their principal marketing mechanisms is to say it's ITAR free. It's become a huge burden for American companies selling overseas, the whole ITAR. I also don't think it's achieving its purpose, which really kind of came out of the Cold War, is kind of put a barrier up against really a single peer adversary. That was how the system was designed. I don't know whether it worked particularly well there, but it's working not at all now. So we need to shift that system. We still need to protect certain technologies, but I think it's many, many fewer than we do. We probably want higher walls around those, but much more freedom to sell overseas the other technologies, which generally are widely available in the international marketplace. If we don't sell them, it doesn't mean potential adversaries don't get them. It just means that U.S. companies lose overseas sales.
Thank you.
Hi, Dustin Hitt. Admiral, you talked about systems of systems and open operating systems, plug and play. Those things I hear from PMs cost more money because they have a program of record that is working, and if you want to add something to it, they have to go through a validation testing process, which can be expensive. So as we go through that process and want to create that open architecture, how do we keep that expense down of requalifying capabilities?
I think the reason they're expensive, depending on who the PM you're talking to, is that they are saying, oh, wait a minute, I have a destroyer today. You want to add a new payload to this. Do you have any idea what that means? I've got to break open the currently proprietary system made by some big company that isn't going to be the payload company, and that's going to be expensive. And I say, yeah, that's why the next time we build, we don't buy these large, necessarily proprietary thing at all. Give me a backbone, give me power, cooling, and volume, and then I'll turn to this smaller company. And again, we got it in unmanned underwater vehicles. We got it on a missile. We tested a missile last fall by a company coming down. We strapped it on the back of the ship, and they said, put in the lat and long, the GPS coordinates. We hooked it up to one of those silver laptops, and we launched it, and it hit. Now, that's the easy part. So how do you integrate that? As we look ahead at our ships, if we don't do kind of what I'm alluding to, every PM will say exactly that. And then we'll wait till the next big docking period or whatever, which could be years, and this world won't allow that. We don't have years to put a new capability on. Things are evolving too fast.
Is it worth giving up capability immediately for the first iteration in order to preserve adaptability down the road?
No, I don't think you have to do that. It depends on, I think what you're implying is I'll build kind of a dumber ship and bring it out and then put the payloads in. No, I think as I'm building this ship and I put the specs out, I'm going out to industry, as you were saying, and saying, hey, you guys, who's got some good ideas and clear requirements, and open it up and allow those that come forward to and pick their ideas, if you know what I mean. But you have to be fairly specific in the specs so that things are compatible. The way industry is making weapons, kinetic and non-kinetic today, electromagnetic stuff as well as stuff that blows up, you can do that. I mean, we are seeing it, and we're scratching our head and sometimes saying, I wish we hadn't gotten so far down the road on the system we're putting in right now. I can't back out, I have to wait, because they're sitting there as something that is cheaper and in fact, more effective. So I don't think it necessarily has to be that. But Julian, you do have to get with industry sooner as you're laying out these requirements and talk about what you're going to ask for in these payloads, if you see what I'm saying.
Mr. Brown, do you think the Department of Defense is doing that enough at this moment in time, making things open enough so that bits of technology as they advance can be plugged in?
I think it's a step in the process. I think there's more to be done. I think it's the right intention. I think, from a variety of our business, especially in tactical radio, I think the department has moved towards open protocol systems. So we happen to have a proprietary waveform that we developed back in the mid-2000s when there wasn't a waveform available for wideband communications. It's a proprietary investment we've made. And the department, when they put together the strategy on the jitter strategy, joint tactical radio system, they basically said we're not going to go forward with technologies where the waveform would be proprietary. It would all be open, shared, put in a library, shared with all the various vendors. I think you're making a right step down in that direction. I think that's in the radio business. I think we're seeing the same thing in the rest of the business we're in.
Next question.
Sure. Byron Callen, Capital Alpha Partners. Bill Brown, you, in your conference calls with investors, you specifically highlight how much you spend as a percent of R&D on sales, which is a little unique in the industry. I just wonder if you could talk about how you think about setting that level and the time frame you want to get a return on that investment, and then if the rest of the panel wants to pick up.
You know, we 3 years ago when I started at Harris, our R&D IRAD as a percent of revenue was around 4%, 4.2%. This year will be about 5%. Last year we were right around 5%. So we've ramped it up, and we're investing money in really across our portfolio. We certainly have stepped up in the tactical radio business. The returns in that business are very, very good. The way I look at it is we have a unique position in that marketplace, and that is that we have a very agile commercial model that moves very, very quickly, and I see the returns on investment there to be quite strong over time. There's 1.2 million radios in the DoD inventory today. More than 90% of those radios are narrowband only. And you can imagine soldiers, warfighters that were in high school and grew up on an iPhone, have the ability to quickly download YouTube videos, then go in the military and working on a sort of a Motorola StarTAC or a big block in terms of its capacity and speed. We know that's going to change. The smaller force has to be more technically capable. And in our view, that happens to be through technology, that happens to be through communications, sharing of information. You know, and we know it's going to end up, it's almost like gravity, it's going to end up happening. So are we predicting the time frame for that to shift at the right place? I'm not really sure. But I'm very certain that the return is going to be there, and that's why we stepped up so much on R&D, especially in the tactical radio side. So thank you, Byron.
Another question.
Hi, this question is for Admiral Greenert. My name is Scott Hanley. I was a hospital corpsman for 6 years, and this past summer I received a direct commission as a public affairs officer. So I'm really excited to be back in the Navy. I know that the Navy has had some retention issues over the past few years, especially in the JO community. And with all the talk of innovation and everything that you've been doing and the Navy's been doing in better preparing our sailors for the fleet, both in the classroom and experiential learning out in the fleet, what is the Navy doing from keeping these fine folks from swooping in and taking your JOs, these talented JOs who would be fine leaders in the Navy? What is the Navy currently doing to address those retention issues?
Well, it depends on the issue for the reason for the retention issue. Our overall retention is good, but that masks what you're describing, which are retention issues in people that fly, some of our junior officers, people that do nuclear submarines, which is an issue unto itself because those are high investments. Cyber people, they are the people who the airlines are hiring again. There's always been nuclear openings and of course cyber. So they need to feel that what they're doing is relevant. They need to understand that that they're appreciated and that we will expand their horizons and we'll educate them. Now, that's difficult to do in uncertain times, so we need to keep them certain. They need to think of war fighting first. They need to understand where we're going, and I need to make sure I communicate that. So it is going to be about money, and I think that might be one of your messages. My son reminds me of that all the time. I'm from a different generation. It's making sure that they have a sense for what they're doing, again, is important, and they're in an institution that will continue to enable them. It's a continuing saga that I am on all the time.
Are there additional tools that you need, Admiral, to recruit technical experts, be there in cyber or other sort of some of the technological fields we've been talking about today? Do you need to be able to bring someone in at a higher rank than they might otherwise go in, direct commissioning for
cyber?
For cyber or for, you know?
You know, actually, cyber is one of the easiest areas for somebody to come in and integrate. If you go up to NSA, if you go into any of our Navy Information Operations Centers, you'll see somebody in camouflage outfit, a sailor, with a crew cut or something, and next to him be somebody with tattoos and piercings all over. So they're working side by side, patriots, young Americans working together, all ages and skills. That's an interesting area where you have an integration of folks that may want to serve in the Navy or actually the department and the country in a civilian capacity perhaps, but with the same mission. No, I think, Julian, to make a sailor, somebody right off the street, a cyber warrior, we have a lot of work to do that, but you've got to have kind of basics of cyber, and then you build upon that. That's a structure, a challenge that in the 6 minutes we have left, I would exceed everything you had here. But it is something that in our training baseline we need to work on. We have turned to industry, and industry has done very well, and they are very interested. Microsoft, Google, all the big ones, but also so many more who are willing to teach us how to train somebody faster in that very arena you said.
There's probably time for another question if somebody wants to get up there, and in the meantime, we'll ask a little bit more about General Perkins, who spoke this morning, talked about the need to train a new generation of soldiers to be innovative on the battlefield, innovative in the procedures they are thinking about, because technological advances will not last as long for the reasons we've talked about. How do you, I want to ask Admiral Greenert how you encourage sailors to be more innovative in their daily life, and I want to ask you, Mr. Goodman, what the DoD can do to translate that innovation into sort of practical reforms. But start with you, Admiral Greenert.
Well, I don't want to use tired terms, but you got to empower them. They need to understand what their the breadth of their authority is, and so that has to be clear. But let me tell you, I scratched the surface with this little thing called the CNO's Rapid Innovation Cell. There's 12 of them at any given time. I've had 3 of them there, but they have a network of over 2,000 that they reach out to the fleet and say, "Hey, I'm working on this project. Give me some ideas on that." So kid says, "Hey, I'm out here at sea, I'm on the bridge, and when we bring a ship alongside to take fuel, it's such a pain in the butt to be able to maintain course speed. The waves are going, what's the distance there? Is there a better way to do it?" And he said, "Well, yeah, why don't you use Google glasses?" And he said, "Well, how do I do that?" I said, so they got a hold of Google, gave them the glasses, and they put the program in there so that just through the network, Wi-Fi, the ship's laydown of course, speed, distance, and all that is now portrayed right up there on the little Google Glass. So he just looks over there and he's got all that laid up there. That turned into, if I looked over there at that airplane, it would tell me the course speed and altitude of that thing, and the guy has access to that. It's that sort of networking feature. The millennials, they're all connected. They got an idea, they go crazy on the thing. It's bringing all that together and then rewarding them for doing it by allowing them to having them understand they made the change. So this is like theoretical speak, but it's turning that into actuality, and that's a journey that I'm on to do that and get that out there. It is a little bit, as was said before, counterculture, but you got to keep building on it.
Mr. Goodman, do you have a response to my totally mangled question, or should I?
No, I got it. So, Julian, your first mangled response was making fun of the application of magic bands to the Navy. But what Admiral Greenert talked about with the application of Google Glass is exactly that. And what Disney did in their realization that they needed to transform their concept of operations to enable a customer experience for people who grew up in a connected world is exactly the challenge that Admiral Greenert has with sailors of today. The one, tying in your comment about cultural change, fundamentally the most important cultural change I think we need to enable if we're going to promote innovation is that we're going to have a series of failures. And we need to figure out a way where those failures come in manageable sizes and it's okay. Because absent, and I think currently in the acquisition I'd say the acquisition environment is a zero tolerance environment for the most part. It is not career enhancing, to have a project you're working on not succeed. But I don't think we'll get innovation. Certainly, we don't get innovation in our business, 100% of the time. And so I think, as we're driving the cultural change, that needs to be a key part of it.
So we have less than a minute left. Make your question quick.
Hi, is this working?
Or maybe it's...
Hi, is it working? Okay.
Yep.
Hi, Ted Harshberger from the RAND Corporation. Just, I was struck by the Admiral's comment about bringing innovation up from the bottom at sort of a personal, a tactical level, and then trying to spread it out. And this is sort of the opposite of the disruptive innovation concept. You have industry disruptively innovating, but the department's challenge is how to explosively adopt these things and get them widespread use in these very large organizations. So my question is really, how do you drive those individual innovations into a widespread use that actually changes capability at the force level? Does it take the CNO to do it? I'd actually ask a couple different panel members. How does that process work in our current environment?
We don't have time for all the panel members, so 10 seconds to the Admiral.
Well, I brought these kids into my executive meeting. I had all the admirals together, and the kid that did the cyber test, it was actually kind of scary because I said, we're going to do this test. We did it on a ship. Everybody kind of held their breath, but the fact of the matter is that you guys got to open your eyes. And so bringing them in is one thing, and now that is our test. That is our mandated test adopted by Fleet Cyber Command. It's got an instruction and all that stuff. The Google glasses, we went out and bought for $100,000. We bought, a whole bunch of them. We got a great deal. Bought them in bulk, ship them out to the fleet. We have, it does take me right now, but it's starting to catch on, There's an old saying, hopefully what I like, people are fascinated by in the Navy. And that's kind of a joke, but I'm hopeful for that. But, it is a new concept, but I think we have to do it. Things are moving too fast. We have to reach out there. And the young man that came up and said, how are you going to keep people in? I said, to show that, yeah, you can make you got to do your professional business. I'm way over my time.
Yes.
But you're also, this is your future, and it doesn't take long before you're in charge, so you better damn get involved in it, and that's just one way to do it.
Please help me thank the panelists. Thank you.